I think it's happening. Oh, it is. It's recording. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to what do we call this again, Ashley?
You know, it's kind of like the Slay Queens podcast.
I mean, it kind of is, but it's kind of not really at all.
Yeah, but a little bit sometimes, I think.
Sometimes, kind of, sort of, yeah, but not really at all.
But no, not even kind of close.
But I mean, sometimes it is.
Yeah, a little bit, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we call these the shallow dive episodes. So, welcome back, everybody, to the Slay Queens podcast. This is a very special shallow dive edition.
Yeah.
We have actually brought in a very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself, very special guest?
Hello, my name is Chris. I am the host of Here's My Story and a new podcast that I just started with my 6-year-old daughter called the Naughty Words Podcast, which is just a quick little fun thing where we break down naughty words, cuss words, and words that we just don't like. And the first episode is fuck, so it's fun.
That's one way.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I personally like all of those words, so I can appreciate that. And we can also appreciate Chris. Chris is a deep, deep, deep friend of the Queens. We have been in communication with Chris, I think, since around episode 1 or 2. Very, very, very supportive. And I really really respect and enjoy everything that you do with your podcast. So thank you so much for being with us here today and just participating in all of the shenanigans and the tomfoolery.
Really nervous, actually, and excited because, I mean, you guys have been great. You know, ever since I reached out for the first time, you guys have been great with, shouting out the podcast and talking about it and our interactions online and all that. It's been great. So I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be here.
We're so excited to have you. So thank you so much again for being here with us. And Ashley, would you like to kick us off a little bit and talk to us about, I know that there was an episode of Chris's podcast that you really liked particularly.
Yes. The name will always slip my mind because I've listened to every episode, but in particular, my favorite was the transgendered female to male.
Yeah, that was Angie and Nathan. Angie is the mother. I worked with her back in about 2000, I want to say. I was about 20, 21 years old. And we worked together at a grocery store, and her kids would come in all the time. And in the episode, she alludes to the father basically just kind of being a piece of crap. Mm-hmm. And they latched on to me for whatever reason. And, there's 2 little girls at the time. And I was always really close to him when we worked there, and then she moved on and I moved on, and I've seen him off and on throughout the years. And it took me a while to learn about Jessica, who then became Nathan, mm-hmm. and seeing it online and hearing her talk about it and everything was pretty awesome because she's a nice lady anyway, but we all know how people can be when it comes to stuff like this. Sure. So to see her support and everything, she was one of the very first people that I reached out to when I decided to start the Here's My Story podcast, and she was all about it. So I was really, really glad to be able to tell such a strong story.
So yeah, in that it's kind of like, in a way that we kind of connected, because you think about, you didn't really kind of explain what your podcast is about, and it's, mental health stories and like different kind of issues like that. And we came in contact, I think mostly because of that story, like it kind of made sense for us to like really get to know each other, which kind of obviously was the reason why it was the first one I listened to. But then after hearing you talk just on that one, I'm like, man, I want to hear the rest of these. Like, this is awesome. He does a good job. I mean, you're reading other people's stories, but you're doing it in a non-biased, but also I feel empathetic way, which I really appreciate.
As far as the format goes, I thought it would be easier for people to submit their stories to me.
Sure.
Because the pressure of being like right now, like we're talking here, like I feel the pressure and I don't want to stutter. I don't want to screw up. I don't want to say something stupid, which I will say something stupid at one point.
I always do.
I know that I will.
Those are my favorite moments.
So I thought it just people, and also it allows them to open up just as much as they want. They don't have to cross that line, and sometimes cross that line accidentally, like they would in an interview style. They
Yeah.
may, so it gives them the ability to structure their story how they want and how they want it to be heard. So
That's a really good point. I never considered it that way. I considered it from like, yeah, our side of it. Like, yeah, I don't have to actually think about what I'm going to say while I'm telling the story. I can maybe put emphasis on certain words and say it in a certain way, but at the end of the day, they get to tell their story the way that they want it to be told, rather than,
right.
okay, that's
it takes
awesome.
it takes all the pressure out of it for them.
Yeah. Well, for everyone involved, really.
Except for me when I have to take 75 takes per episode because I can't speak. But that's okay. That's neither here nor there.
We all do that.
That's the way we edit things. But it is hard because relying 100% on your content through on the follow through of others is really hard.
Yeah, sure.
But stories are steadily coming in, so I guess I can go ahead and pull the queen out of the hat and say that Wayne is actually my next episode. So
yes.
Who is she? I don't know her.
You like that?
I don't know her.
Yeah. So yeah. I recorded a little bit of that tonight, and I'm going to finish it up after we're done here, and I'm going to release it this weekend. So it's a good story. I like doing it. I like reading it, and I'm glad that he sent it to me. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I got goosebumps when I saw his name come across my email, and I was like, ooh.
I have that effect on a lot of men, so I'm not surprised by that.
Don't talk about that.
I'm actually very honored to have my story told on your platform. I think I even said in the review that I gave you on Apple reviews that I respect so much that you have normalized people talking about these struggles and these things that they've gone through in their life, and these very significant things that are very personal that maybe we've been taught as a more conservative society that we shouldn't talk about in a very public forum like that. And I love the fact that you're encouraging people to do that, and giving people the opportunity just to have a place to do that. Because sometimes, honestly, it's easier to tell those hard stories and tell people those hard facts when it's not someone who knows you and has this kind of preconceived idea of who you are and what your life has been. And another thing that I want to really commend you for, the thing that sticks out in my memory the most about kind of my first interactions with you is when you were preparing for the episode, and you knew that you were going to be discussing a lot of like transgender content. You reached out to me and you asked for some advice about, you may not have even known that it was me, but you reached out to, I think, the Twitter account, or maybe it was the Instagram account, asking for some advice about the appropriate terms to use and not wanting to offend anybody and wanted it to be as appropriate as possible. And I just respected that.
But you really threw a curveball in your story because I had to say a word I was not comfortable saying.
I said it. And I think oftentimes, as long as, because I do this a lot on our podcast specifically, I say things as a direct quote that wouldn't normally be terminology that I would use, but I just tell the listeners, this is a direct quote. I mean, no disrespect by it to anyone. And I just commend you so much for that, because I think where some people make huge mistakes is they don't know what they don't know. And I think maybe in that regard, in that specific situation, you said, okay, I know that I don't know as much about this as I should, and I want to. And I respect that so much. And I just think it's so amazing. And I think it speaks for your character as a person and someone who's trying to tell these stories as responsibly and respectfully as possible. So thank you, as someone from the queer community, so much for doing that.
Well, I really appreciate that. And it all just boils down to not wanting to offend anybody. I mean, I am 100% an ally in every sense of the word, but I'm also a 40-year-old man and I say dumb shit all the time, and I offend people all the time. And it's not because I'm a bad person. It's just because of the way I was raised, where I was raised, and how normal, I don't know how to put it, but there are just a lot of words that I've used in my life that just aren't right. But
Yeah.
I don't do it out of hate. I do it just because it was normal, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't have been, and it shouldn't be. So I wanted to make sure, doing a story like that, that I reached out to somebody who I knew would be straightforward with me and give me the advice that I needed to make sure I did it right. So
Yeah. And I appreciate that so much. It was a great story, and I personally, I think my favorite, just because of the slay queen, the crime queen in me, I think my favorite of the episodes that you've done so far was the Kathy episode. Do you want to
Okay,
tell some of the
I'm
folks?
confused.
yeah,
The
that
name.
was awesome. The Kathy Kleiner episode, for those who don't know, and if you're listening to a true crime podcast and you don't know who Kathy Kleiner is, shame on you, but she is a Ted Bundy survivor. She was one of the sorority girls that was attacked at the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida. And I just happened to see her post. I think there was another podcast that had retweeted something that she had posted. And I went, holy crap, she's on Twitter. So I just reached out to her, just whatever, no expectations whatsoever. I sent her a direct message and said, hey, Chris, here's my story pod. This is what I do. Shut my phone off and went back to work. And within like 3 hours, she got back to me. I was like, yeah, let's do this. I was like, oh my
It's
God. Like I
amazing.
freaked out. I totally fanboyed out over it. And, and I'm not ashamed at all. But
I mean, we fangirl and fanboyed over her messaging you, so I can't imagine being.
Absolutely. I
yeah,
think you reached out to me and we were like, oh my God, this has happened. And of course I like screen capped it and reached out to Ashley and was like, holy shit. Oh my God, this has happened. We're like 6 degrees of separation away from Ted Bundy,
and I was, selfishly in the back of my head, I was like, a true crime thing would not be bad to get some listeners, because we all know that true crime is the number one genre that gets all the listens. But on top of it, I mean, the timing was right too, because all the Ted Bundy stuff was kind of hot at the time.
Yeah.
The Netflix special had just come out and she was doing interviews and this, and I tried to get it out, on the coattails of that, just from a listen standpoint, but just from a true crime fan standpoint, I was like, holy crap. And I think that story, out of everything that I've done, really personifies what I'm trying to do, because Kathy Kleiner is a Ted Bundy survivor.
Mhm.
You didn't know that she was a cancer survivor. You didn't know that she had lupus. You didn't know that she lived through Hurricane Katrina, and all these other, she's more than just a Ted Bundy survivor. She is all of these things. And I'll tell you what, that woman has been through some shit.
Yeah.
She has. It was a really intense episode, and honestly, it gave me such greater appreciation for not just defining someone by one thing that you know about them and one thing that you know about the life that they live. And that kind of brought me back to a personal place for me where I have said over the course of like my time of being a very open and honest man about who I am and my truth and the life that I live, not wanting people to define who they think I am or what their opinions of me are based on just a little bit of knowledge they have of me as a person. And it's always nice to kind of have someone check you and make you realize that you're doing that same thing to someone else, just with it's a different label. So it was a very pensive episode for me to listen to, and I think that's probably why I enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, and I've actually got an update that I start your episode with. Todd, the hydrocephalus episode, he actually ended up in the hospital here recently with some seizures and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He's home now, and he's on some medication and stuff, but just, it's one of those things where I saw his wife post it on Facebook and my heart dropped, because like, he's not only somebody that I've talked about and got to know because of the podcast, but he's just a good person, and his family are just good people. And it's important that, you talk about your stuff. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Let people know. He was super excited about having the episode. And when he got home from the hospital, he reached out and said, if you want to tell people what happened, go ahead.
That's great. That's amazing.
That is fantastic. That's awesome. That's like, I don't have words for that. It's hard to like, put out there like that. It's awesome. I can't even imagine.
Just namaste. Sometimes,
There you go.
sometimes that's all it needs. I do want to ask you, Chris, because I have had this thought process a couple of times whenever I've listened to your podcast, and I've seen some of your posts, and I've heard you mention a couple of times in the podcast that you're really reliant on stories. And I wondered a couple of times if you got to a point where you maybe didn't have people reaching out to you who didn't just kind of have that, I don't want to say the bravery, but if they were maybe hesitant, there were people that were hesitant to share their stories, but they liked the podcast and they wanted to continue to hear things. If you were short content, would it be outside of the realm of possibility for you to maybe research someone a name that we would all recognize? And the example that I keep coming to in my mind is like Robin Williams. We know that he struggled with depression, and we know that he struggled with all of these things. Would that be something that you would maybe be interested in doing if you were at that point where you're like, I don't have content that people have submitted, but I still want to tell a story of someone who struggled with behavioral health and whatnot? Is that something you would consider doing at some point, or?
I've thought about it, but I'm so new to this podcast game that I don't know. If I tell a story about Robin Williams and if by some chance somebody hears it and they don't like it,
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So yeah. I don't know. I've definitely thought about it because Robin Williams is a perfect example, and I'm glad you brought him up because I was a huge fan of his, and I feel that I'm, obviously if somebody's going to start a podcast where they talk about, as I call it, there's a reason why I started something like that. I have my own problems. I deal with my own stuff, and he was somebody that kind of resonated with me with the whole comic background. This person is always the saddest on the inside and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's a great example.
Yeah. And I apologize if that threw you off at all. It's literally a curiosity that I personally have had. Just wondering if it was an idea that would help you out if you were in a position where you're like, I'm really kind of struggling for some content here.
Or I guess my question would be, if you had ever met anyone personally, would you maybe think to reach out to them and be like, hey, I have an idea for a story? Is that something that would be, you don't feel comfortable enough doing, or are you just kind of like, what is that something you would do or no?
Yeah, I'm not very shy when it comes to that stuff. So I ask all kinds of people and all different, scenarios and all that. So I'm always looking for content. I'm not shy about it. I've sent so many messages that have, gone unread or ignored or anything like that. Yeah. But I've also got those people that I reached out to well before I started the whole thing, because I wanted to try and get stories coming in early that, they're all about it, but yet they just don't ever submit it. So, and to a point, I can't really bug them too much, Yeah.
Sure.
So, I've got some pretty heavy stories that I knew that I wanted. And one of them was a childhood cancer patient that was real big in the area. And she's all about writing it, but she just hasn't done it. And I know it's probably because she's got so much to tell. Because it was one of those local stories where everybody was behind this child, and unfortunately he did lose his life. And St. Jude is a huge, huge thing in our area because of it. We've had, so many issues with it. And I know she wants to tell the story, and I don't want to push her away by bothering her too much.
Interesting.
But, so.
Well, I love what you do. I respect what you do. I hope that you can continue to do it with as much content as you can handle. And hopefully some of our listeners will reach out and want to be a part of the podcast. If somebody has a story that they want to tell you, Chris, how can they reach you?
All they have to do is email me at here'smystorypod@gmail.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram with Here's My Story Pod. And then there's a Facebook group, the Here's My Story Pod. It's a private group. So if people feel like posting about their issues, their friends don't see their posts. So it's only contained within the group. So we have had a few people who have, it's a slow group, but people are there. And when people do post, there's other people commenting rather quickly.
That was me.
So.
Sorry. I told you it would happen. It inevitably always happens. And it was my mother, by the way.
Pretty sure Sierra must
always.
So I can't hear mine.
I love it. That's great.
Yeah. And anybody who follows our social media, we pretty regularly, at least semi-regularly, we shout out the Here's My Story Pod. So you can, I'm sure, find a link to find Chris if you're following our social media as well.
Yeah. But you guys have been great, and I really appreciate it.
Oh no, you've been just as supportive of us, and we really, really appreciate that. And I think it's important to have these relationships with people who kind of have the same goals to grow their own podcast, but also like help other people be successful. And you've been very much that for us. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, quite honest, it's the first podcast aside from Joe Rogan that I listened to that wasn't true crime. So, and I enjoy it.
Give me some goosebumps, girl.
Just saying, it's true. I've literally never listened to a podcast that wasn't true crime or Joe Rogan, except for yours.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's pretty complimentary. Ashley doesn't even listen to our podcast most of the time, so you should really. I'm joking. Okay, so if we don't have anything else with regard to,
I have two things I want to talk about real quick before we get started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody who is a fan of true crime knows here lately about, not that I want to pimp other podcasts, but the Voices for Justice podcast with Sarah Turney.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to point out that today, Alyssa Turney would have been 36 years old. Today is her birthday.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And I think that it's worth mentioning because that case is crazy and her podcast is insane.
Very good.
And I just thought that it was worth mentioning.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. Cheers.
And then I also want to bring up last episode when you had that podcast reviewer complaining about your coughs and your throat clearing and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that review. I don't remember why I was looking, but I saw it a few days before you guys released that episode. And I thought to myself, what an ass. Like, for one, I've never even noticed it. Like, it completely goes over my head. I don't hear it. I've never noticed it until he said something, until you talked about it. And obviously on that episode, you made a conscious effort to not do it. But when you started talking about the autoimmune part of it, I also have an autoimmune disease. So I understand that the hurt that you had in your voice really hit me because it is impossible as a person with an autoimmune disease to explain it to another person because you look fine, you act fine, but you hurt. And I want to commend you on talking about that because there's so many people in my life that, they know that I have an autoimmune, but they just don't get what I go through. I have sarcoidosis, which is funny because anybody who grew up watching ER or House, the joke was always, it's never sarcoidosis. Well, guess who's got it? This guy. And
no.
My life perfectly.
I'll do you better. I've been a bodybuilder or a power lifter since my late teens, early 20s. And I used to make fun when people said that they had a gluten sensitivity, that they had celiac disease. That's not a real thing. Gluten's just a thing. It's literally just a preservative. Everyone can process it. Guess who has celiac disease in their late 20s and early 30s?
So you know exactly where I'm coming from.
Oh, as soon as I figured that out, I was like, I fucking hate myself. I literally, like, I'm everything I don't want to be, but now I know it's a very real thing that I should not have made fun of for so fucking long.
Right.
I appreciate that. I really, really do. Like, you almost made me cry, so I had to make a joke for a second about myself, you know?
Right. And that's how I handle things too. But just so you know, that particular reviewer was a complete ass pony, and
Thank you.
you don't want that kind of person as a listener anyway. So
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Okay, I have a really, really important question to ask. I'm going to ask the two of you at some point, but I'm a Southern gentleman. I'm going to start with Ashley because that's the sort of thing you do when you're a Southern gentleman, even though she's likely more of a man than I am.
I'm the bronze, you're the brain.
You are definitely the brawn. She just referenced the fact that she was a power lifter. But I do want you both to think about this.
The only thing I power lift is 12-ounce cans of beer. Sorry, not sorry.
I'm lifting this margarita pretty routinely this evening. Thank you, the Ludlow Tavern. She also listens. We love Alita. Shout out to their proprietor.
Shout outs, always.
Yeah, support the local businesses, especially during this COVID-19 quarantine time. It's very, very, very important.
Which makes the question you're about to pose just insanely difficult for me, but...
Yes. So I'm going to ask you both, but I'm going to start with Ashley. This is a super important question. So Ashley, I want you to put your serious like face and your thinking cap on. All right, you got it? You ready? Okay. What have you, Ashley, been diving into, Queen?
Being that I have my own autoimmune disorder and have been stuck in the house now, we have a daily counter going 15 days. It's been 15 days since I've left the house.
That sounds awful.
What have I not been diving into?
So you have a plethora of things that you can choose from.
But we were, trying to like maybe like hone in on something that's relevant to like all three of us, or, something relevant to this little episode. And I'm just going to start us off by talking about Tiger King.
Okay. All right. We turned down that street and we're going to live there for a while because I feel like there's a lot to say.
Because we talked about quite a few things we could talk about, right? Like the three of us. And we'll get to all of them. But this one, I think the reason I want to talk about it so avidly now is Sierra and I had started it. And I'm an animal rights advocate. Very much so that when I was a teenager, I was in PETA 2. Not PETA, but PETA 2, the offshoot that seemed not as crazy, whatever. Got looped into that kind of thing. So in watching the first episode of that limited series, I was just annoyed. I was like, why are we spending money on this? Why are people paying attention to this? I don't want to watch it. And then I kept just seeing everything else on the internet, So the internet impeded us to do it. It made us just do it.
Yeah.
So 2 days ago, we finally watched the whole series all the way through. And I won't even lie. By the middle of episode 3, we were pausing it and yelling at each other, why would this motherfucker do this? Do you think? It was like an argument every 15 minutes. So I don't even know what to start with on that. Can you lead us in conversation when I'm telling you what I want to talk about?
I can fake it, which is what I do the majority of the time. Completely relevant that this is something that we would talk about because it is LGBTQIA true crime content.
Insanely. It's almost like they wrote it for us.
Okay, so I think maybe a good place to start, or just to cover all of our bases, is first and foremost, did she or didn't she?
Absolutely.
100%.
I agree 1,000%. I think Carol Baskins had something to do with her husband's disappearance and death.
But here is what seals the deal for me. And it wasn't the sardine oil comment, because to me that was a one-off thing. Like, okay, all the other comments she made up leading up to that point, like, whatever, I don't care about. That one comment, it's like the one comment everyone was like, oh, she knew how to do it. Like, whatever.
Freudian slip.
But to me, it is that, have you gone to the Big Cat Rescue website since this thing has aired?
I have not.
I also have not. No,
I
I can't take
did.
any of it seriously.
No, this is why, because we were questioning, had she did it, had she not done it, right?
Mm.
So the reason why I firmly believe she did it is because if you go to that website, the first thing you're going to be prompted to do is go to another website where she is defending herself and everything that they'd said wrong on that documentary.
Yeah.
If you didn't do what they're saying, just business as usual, you know what I mean? Like, let it go, just fucking write it out. But like, she just is so addicted to this drama, just like having her, like, to her, all press is good press, just like Joe, obviously, too. But literally, you're defending yourself. The first fucking thing you're doing on your website is defending yourself. You did it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you have to put that on your website like that and make people go through that just to prove you're innocent, you're trying too hard. Just
That's what
too
I'm
hard.
saying.
Too hard.
I will say that I am also on the side of the argument where I believe ultimately she is responsible for her husband's disappearance and his death. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the man's dead at this point. He's been legally declared dead. So if nothing else, he's legally dead.
And he knew he was going to die.
Yeah, but I will also play devil's advocate because I try to do that. We often talk about, especially when we talk about true crime cases and people who are viewed as suspects in like crimes and disappearances and whatnot, we time and time again, we say things like, you shouldn't have a preconceived notion of how someone should behave in light of a tragedy. We shouldn't have preconceived notions of how people are supposed to grieve and how they're supposed to express those feelings.
Okay. Yeah.
So when she is accused in a very, very like public forum of perpetrating this crime against her husband, I mean, who are we to say what's normal behavior and what's not for her to respond to it? You know what I'm saying?
That's a
Great point. Great point.
That's a good point. To me, sure. And we also say too, like, if you're someone who has been, you know, accused of something, you would expect that you're going to be very defensive and that you didn't do it.
I would be completely.
My favorite thing was what Sierra said about the whole situation. She's like, well, they reopened the case, right? And I was like, well, as far as the internet says, apparently the case has been reopened. I don't know if that's true or not, but I guess they have said that they're going to reopen the case. And she's like, well, you know what? If she did it, I guarantee her new husband right now is going to roll over her and talk, because he's been bowed down to her for so long and gone through all this with her and blah, blah, blah. She's like, he has to be sick of it by now, right? Just like
She's
your other.
Totally the top in that relationship.
Oh, absolutely. What got to me was like how she laughed about everything.
Yeah.
You know, like
the laughter whenever she cackles is very odd to me. And again, you can't judge a person by the way they grieve because everybody grieves different, like you said. But that manic laughter it just rubs me the wrong way.
It is. It's a cackle. It's not even it's literally, that's what it is. What really got to me was I kept pausing it on scenes, like, especially when she was talking with, like, you know, how they explained like the levels of like interns and like, you know, people that worked for her for free, mind you, how she would look at them. And like, it was a very Hillary Clinton, like, you know, like chin up, but like looking down, kind of very like, I'm above you situation. Not that I'm talking bad about Hillary, don't love her, but either way, it's that very like, I think I'm better than you poised look where I'm like, I want to punch you in the face. Yeah. You know?
It's like they're looking down the side of their nose. Like,
yeah, exactly. That's how Carol Baskins always looks like that.
You're right, yeah.
The thing that I found most offensive was the fact that she was literally doing the thing that she was bashing like Joe and these other people for. She's literally doing that same thing. She's just not, what was the one difference is she wasn't allowing people to take photos with like the cubs and the kittens. That was it. Like everything else was.
Well, she made all of her money from her dead husband, and they were making their money from letting people come and play with their animals.
It was hypocritical. That I didn't love. And then of course, I mean, the fact that she murdered her husband, I didn't advocate, but
I think the first
speculative
was the I forget his name, but the guy who was doing the reality TV recording, that producer, when he first said, I couldn't tell like whose side he was on to begin with, right? But when he first said, I think that Joe and Carol were both doing it for hypocritical reasons. They were both doing it for money. That's when I first was like, ding, 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 this is where this is headed. You know, like this is obviously what both of them are doing it for. And it's not about the animals anymore. And this is where it's going to, all I wanted to know was why he was in jail.
That I don't know yet. I will admittedly say that I didn't get through the whole thing before we started this. I got into episode 5, I think. But I did see though that he was moved into quarantine because some fellow inmates had tested positive for coronavirus, so he got moved. I saw that this morning. So take that as you will. But
right.
That's all I know. That's all I know about him being in prison. I just know he's there and that he got moved into isolation because of this damn pandemic. So
that's crazy.
There was murder for hire charge.
But but the two things that I know that I've taken away. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Officially he's in prison for, I think originally it was a murder for hire charge. And then there were some other charges that were found, you know, over the course of the investigation. I think it was like 7 or 8 counts of issues with the animals specifically. But the thing that he was investigated for and apprehended for was the murder for hire charge. Supposedly money actually like changed hands. And he actually like paid someone to travel to Florida and murder Carol. Now this person didn't do it, obviously.
Without giving too much up.
Yeah, that's the allegation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did listen to the Joe Exotic podcast when it came out late last year. So I do know, you know, a decent amount about it, but there's more in this Netflix special than what was in the podcast. And it had been a while, you know, so I don't remember everything because I barely remember what I had for breakfast this morning. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But I do know the only two things I've taken away from it so far is that Carol killed her husband and Joe totally set fire to his recording studio. And whatever.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I agree.
No way around that one. He did, either he did it or he paid someone to do it and he left town for that reason.
I wish you had finished it though, because I really want to talk about it's going to be hard to say without.
Well, you can spoil it for me. It's fine. Like I said, I listened to the podcast and it'll click. But
or we can always invite him back. I mean,
yeah,
that's also a possibility. But yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that there was a podcast a year or so ago, because I also listened to the podcast. It was by Wondery, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
And what's really interesting is that at first, when everybody started posting and talking about Tiger King, and I started seeing all this stuff on social media, I was like, why does this sound so familiar? It sounds really familiar, but I don't think I know this case. And then when I started watching it, I was like, ding, ding, ding. I know exactly what this is.
And why didn't I know that he ran for president? And
this is the thing. This is, okay, I had a moment. You haven't gotten to the episode yet. I think it might be episode 5 or I think it's episode 5 where there is I can't remember what late night talk show it was on. I wish I would have written it down, but there was Wayne, do you remember there was a late night talk show where they showed him running for president and they were making fun of him, and it was back, during the election time, and it was like, okay, this is the only libertarian we have to vote for. And I remember seeing that on air and being like, who the fuck is this ass backwards redneck guy with tigers? And then I saw it on the docuseries and I was like, oh my God.
It was one of the late shows, like the Late Late Show,
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah, because
I see the guy's face.
I do
I
Yes.
see
too.
the guy's face.
Yeah.
He was a correspondent for what was he on the Jon Stewart show as a correspondent for a while?
Actually, yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah.
But, fuck.
And
I even texted my friend about it and my phone's like all the way over there, but I'm not gonna, it doesn't matter. I just remember seeing that scene and like them bringing it up on TV, and they talked about how even though they were like making such severe fun of him, it literally just fueled his
I
fire.
got a big head over it.
Just
John
like,
Oliver.
oh, I'm gonna be president now because I'm on national television.
John Oliver. Yeah.
There it is. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yes.
Yep. My weak internet came through for me.
I think everybody's is weak these days because literally everyone is at home on their internet. So all of our strengths are diminished.
Mm-hmm.
All
I will
right.
say also, a friend of mine who's been watching, obviously, the Tiger King, just like everybody else in the world, started posting some pictures apologizing for contributing to Doc Andel and his whole thing too. And he's got some pictures where he's feeding tigers and they're posing with tigers and stuff. He's like, I'm sorry, I'm a scum. So Ryan, I still love you. It's okay. My guy, but just don't do it again.
He was one of the only ones that like came up in the documentary where I was watching it and I was like, I know who that fucking guy is. I hate that guy. And then like, and then I just like kept watching on and I was like, wow, I hate him even more now. Like I knew he was like having an at-home zoo kind of like weird culty thing, but then like it got down to it where it's like you're literally bringing in teenage girls, like you're human trafficking at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, that was gross. That was real cringy. Like,
The worst part about that is like that's so fucked up, but that was a sub story of the other story going on.
They almost played that off as normal compared
Right?
to everything else, which is disgusting.
Makes me wonder if there's going to be a spinoff. You know what I mean? Like they gave us just enough of a taste for everybody to be interested. So when they do a full docuseries on Doc and his harem.
Well, and here's the thing too, like Sierra was asking me questions like, why would, what's her name? Oh my God, total blank. What's her name? Carol. Why would Carol, give up so much information and just talk so freely? And I'm like, yeah, because when someone comes to you and says, hey, we're doing a documentary, they're not going to tell you what it's about. They're going to come to you with the best form of what looks good to you. Like what she had written on her website was that Netflix had come to her saying that they were doing a documentary about some kind of oceanity group that was trying to help save the ocean. So she's trying to help save land. They're trying to help save ocean. Let's do a documentary together. Well, of course, it's why she's going to offer up information freely. But it depends on what are you going to present to that person? How are they going to approach the situation? That's a huge part of journalism, right?
It's a huge
I've seen several articles saying that this person is upset with the documentary and this person is upset and this person's upset. Sure. So, I mean, obviously they're just getting the content that they want and they schmoozed them how they needed to, but hey, we enjoy it. So whatever.
I think it's a huge part of any sort of like reality television. The producers are going to create the storylines as the best way that they can. And I'm going to show all of my gay cards here when I use as an example RuPaul's Drag Race. And there are always these contestants every season that talk about how their narrative and the way that they were portrayed, whether or not they were the villain or they were like a top contender or a bottom contender or something of that nature, wasn't really determined by their performance on the show. It was determined by production.
How they did things.
Exactly. And I think it's kind of along the same lines of what you were saying. They like approached her and they're like, hey, we want to interview for these purposes. But they didn't let her know that the narrative was going to be, hey, you're this crazy cat bitch who killed your husband. And that's what we're going to tell the world.
So The reason
Absolutely.
the reason why I personally don't think that Doc Antle will ever have a spinoff is because he's too smart. He's going to see this and he's going to realize he was interviewed for the wrong reasons. He's going to get a lot more heat on him than he probably ever has before in his life. And he's going to be like, fuck this. I'm not giving anyone else any more information. They're going to ruin my culty combine of teenage girls and tigers, you know?
Yeah, there's no way. The only thing that they're going to be able to do with him is talk to former employees, and that's it.
He was
And
smart.
that's not going to make good content. It's going to make some disgusting content, but it's not going to make a show.
Yeah.
He was smart enough to say, you know, even Sarah pointed out, like, he's smart enough to say, like, oh, I'm not going to answer that question because you're going to use it for bad, you know? So, yeah, there's no chance. I wish there was.
Yeah, I do think of all of them. He was the one who had his shit together the most. Unfortunately, because it was bad.
Yeah.
All right,
Ugh.
so do
You
we want to me? No, I'll be a polite host, and I'll go last. So
true. I'm used to having us too.
I know. So friend, guest, Chris,
Yes.
Please tell us. Ashley, you asked the big question.
What have you been diving into?
Well, the documentary that served the Tiger King for me was a new documentary came out on Oxygen this past weekend about the West Memphis Three. It's called The Forgotten West Memphis Three. And it is hosted by a true crime podcaster who has, you know, you can take him or leave him from what I gather. Some people really respect him. Some people don't. I personally did not listen to this podcast until season 5 when he did the West Memphis Three case, because I've been enamored by the case for 20 some years now. And I really respect the way he goes about doing his podcast. He breaks everything down from the outside, takes the evidence as it is without any preconceived notions, and yada, yada, yada. And he did 30, 40 episodes, and then he had to stop because of developments in the case and the documentary that was being filmed and all that. So the documentary was actually not supposed to come out until I think June or July, but Oxygen moved it up because of everything that we're going through. And it was supposed to be a 4-part series through 4 weeks. But what they did was this past weekend, they put 1 and 2 together on Saturday, 3 and 4 together on Sunday. So I went right after that. And, you know, there was some good stuff that came out of that. And I, being somebody who's followed the case for so long, I actually learned a few things. So unfortunately, it's a story about kids and nobody likes that, but
I didn't know. Well, no, here's the thing I was going to say before is I didn't know that he was a podcaster. And I guess that makes sense that he had those episodes. And then, okay, that you answered my question before I asked it.
Yeah, he's got quite the following. What he does is he crowdsources investigations. He breaks down everything, like I said, from the beginning, and everybody in his little Facebook group, which I was in the Facebook group for season 5, which was the West Memphis one, but I left it because it's just too much. It was too much for me. People take it way too seriously, and it was just too much for me. I didn't listen to seasons 1 through 4. I have continued to listen since then, and I do respect what he does and how he does it. But nothing will keep me, more focused than his West Memphis 3 stuff. And he just got done with season 7, and he's preparing for season 8, but he came back to season 5, and he's doing, all the extended, he's played some interviews that were supposed to be in the documentary with Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin that didn't make the documentary. So it was pretty cool to hear that stuff, because he recorded those like 2-3 years ago, and he's just now releasing them. But the information that they've come up with in the documentary has really opened my eyes to it, because the whole satanic panic thing was such a huge thing. And anybody who's knows even the smallest amount about this case knows about the satanic panic part of it, and how just because they were black and Damien was into Wiccan and he wasn't Christian, and if you're not Christian down there, you're automatically, Satan and Metallica t-shirts and, God forbid. So just to hear everything as a whole in that documentary and to be able to learn a few more things that I didn't know previously was really cool. And I'm really hoping that with some of the advanced technologies in DNA that they can actually finally figure this case out, because I don't know if you guys know about MVAC. Have you ever heard about that?
Oh my God, watching that in the Oxygen documentary that just came out. That's what I was going to say, is that's the first time I'd ever heard of this guy, was in this new documentary. And I was very impressed with him, with how unbiased he was with collecting his information, as you had just said. And when you said he was a podcaster, I was like, well, I want to listen to his fucking podcast now, because I liked how he really did collect this information and everything. It was really impressive. So yeah, watching that, how he watched the go ahead, talk about it. You can
do your thing.
Well, yeah. Well, one thing that I hated so much was there's always been a theory out there that there was a fourth kid that was with Stevie, Michael, and Christopher. And he shows up at this guy's house. He has the information that he posted on some subreddit or something saying, I was with them that day and blah, blah, blah. And when he confronts him in his kitchen, the guy is sitting there and just straight up lies to him and says, nope, don't know anything about it. Nope, I wasn't with him that day.
Yep.
And then the guy, knowing, having the information in front of him, pushes him. And then he's like, yeah. And he kind of, just kind of slumps down. Yep, I was there. And then he starts telling this information, and you can just tell that it's manufactured information. Like, it's not genuine. Yep, I was wearing green shorts that day. Yep, I was with him from here to, you could just tell it was information that he found on the internet and was just trying to make a name for himself because he was from that town. And then he takes him to the spot, to the pipe bridge. And well, hold on, let me backtrack. During that interview in his kitchen, he spouts off some misinformation about the color of the pipe. He says it's white. And then he's like, are you sure it's white? Well, it's like white, or it's dark, or it's green or something, or whatever. So then, you want to take a ride with me? So they go there. He's like, well, here's the pipe. It's this big dark green pipe with the steel beams next to it. And you can tell that the producer behind the camera is like, all right, we're done. Like, we got to go. And the guy who kind of wanders off and goes, oh, hey, look, there's there's the pipe I was talking about. And there is a white PVC type pipe going across one of the river, or I don't want to say river, but little stream bridge. And he's like, oh yeah. So you did say white the first time, but then when they cut the interview, he goes, yeah, that pipe wasn't visible back then.
Yeah.
He's like, can they show like the comparison picture of the overhead? He's like, that's a new pipe. It wasn't there back then, or it had eroded and it was underground or something. I don't remember exactly. It was one or the other, but it wasn't there, or it wasn't visible back in 1990, whatever. And I got so freaking mad about that. I'm like, you're not helping. I hate.
Right. What are you doing?
So, but the MVAC part of it, I'm really hoping that they're able to pull some DNA out of that. And specifically, he's testing the knots of the shoestrings that tied the legs and the arms together, because they actually had hair from one of the fathers or stepfathers before. And the West Memphis Three deniers will always say, well, that doesn't matter. That could just transfer. But, the denial of people who just think that they're 100% guilty, they'll push off something like that, but then at the same time say, well, this alibi doesn't fit, or this doesn't fit, when it's just so obvious to anybody who's unbiased. You're like, you're you're contradicting yourself so bad.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I love that he said in that, I can't remember if it was in the oxygen episode or if it was in his follow-up episode on the podcast. You can take it with a grain of salt, because as an alibi, if you have an alibi, like the day after something happens, that's one thing. But like 4 months later, he's like, an innocent person doesn't have a rock solid alibi. And like I said, grain of salt. If if my wife disappears tomorrow and they ask me the next day, obviously I'm going to know what I was doing. But if you ask a person 4 months down the road and they know exactly what they were doing that day and where, that's some bullshit. And that actually ties into another story later that I think we may talk about, but I digress.
I actually lived in Memphis, Tennessee for about 14 years. Now, this was long after the murders of the young boys, and the West Memphis Three were imprisoned at the time. Now, this was while they were in prison before they were released. And for anybody who's maybe not familiar, Memphis, Tennessee is literally just across the Ohio River from West Memphis, Arkansas. So West Memphis is literally just across the bridge from Memphis, Tennessee. It's Mid-South. It's considered the Bible Belt. It's all very, very conservative community. But West Memphis, Arkansas is actually even more of a conservative community in the fact that it's a little bit of a poorer community. So they're maybe not as well educated, and they maybe do have some very simple views of things that they don't understand. So even in the years that I lived there, and we're talking essentially early 2000s into the early 2010s, people there were still very adamant about the fact that these men had killed these little boys because of the air quotes like satanic panic reasons. They wore black clothing. He had a trench coat. He wore Metallica t-shirts. He listened to this type of music. And I don't remember the details of the case because I'm not brushed up on it super recently, but I did read a book some years ago. Even though they had rock solid alibis, and the fact that weren't two of the boys literally sitting in class in school when the murders happened, something like that.
What it was Jesse Miss Kelly, who
had a learning disability.
I don't have, his IQ was somewhere in the 70s. I want to say 76, 77.
Yeah.
If you listen to the interrogations, they coached him so bad.
Yeah.
And it was so obvious. The first time that he answers the question about when they, initiated the kids in the woods, he said it was noon. And then eventually it ends up at 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So they coached him all along the way. And that's one thing that they did show in the documentary. They had an expert come in and say, oh, it's absolutely coached. Like, he starts off at noon, and immediately, I think the next question was, well, the kids were out of school though, right? Yeah. So, this is about 3 o'clock. And then they just keep shifting the timeline to fit their narrative. And, I'll go on record 100% saying that there's not a chance in hell that these kids did it.
No,
I can't say kids did it now because they're grown men now, but back then there's not a chance in hell. And I will say that Damien Echols did not help himself whatsoever.
Oh, no, not at all.
Arrogant, which, okay, he knew he didn't do it, and he's just playing it up, doing his thing. And you want to talk about Satan? Well, I'm going to show you how much of a bad boy I am, and unfortunately he paid for it. And I just the incompetence of the police work that we've all unfortunately come to know in this day and age is just so apparent. I mean, even, and the name escapes me, but when they first found the bodies, it is quoted that I think it's Gilchrist, said, well, Damien Echols finally did it. First words out of his mouth when they found the bodies. Are you serious? Are you kidding me right now?
Wow.
Yeah. And I do have to bring up Jim Clemente. because anybody who listens to true crime podcasts should probably know the name Jim Clemente. He's an FBI analyst, super smart guy, knows his stuff. And he's in the documentary too. He does have a close relationship with this podcaster. And his analysis, I think, is spot on. And his analysis, without saying it, 100% points to Terry Hobbs. You know, my dad beat me again. I'm running away.
Yeah.
Kids grab their sleeping bags and they ride their bikes and they're going to go camp out and run away and whatever. I'm sick of my dad beating me or whatever. And, I think he just caught up with them. And there's actually a really emotional interview that they have with one of Terry Hobbs' friends where he's just like, I just want it to be over. He's like, he came here looking for Stevie and then he left and he came back. He's like, I think he did it. I don't remember if he actually said it, but you could just tell that he's like, I think that my friend did this. So, yeah, but Jim Clemente's profiling every time that I've ever seen him has been so spot on that, the dude knows his stuff. And one of the big things that he pointed out was how they were restrained with the shoestrings was, right ankle to right hand, left ankle to left hand. You can still get away. You can still run. You can still get up and move when you're, and I think it was Michael was the one that was found downstream. He wasn't with the other two. So it makes you think that, yeah, he probably tried to run, because when you first hear it, when they described it, they said they were hogtied. Absolutely not a hogtie, because if you're hogtied, you're not moving.
No.
But, the left to left, right to right, you can stand up and you can, move. You can move.
Yeah.
And Michael was found downstream. I think he tried to get away and unfortunately wasn't able to do it. But yeah, it's a gut-wrenching case just because it was three small kids. One of them was wearing a freaking Cub Scout uniform, for God's sakes, or Boy Scouts, whichever one it was. And
Yeah.
I think that alone just makes you go, God damn it, really? But yeah, I've been fascinated with this case for so many years, and I think that with this MVAC testing, they're finally going to be able to pinpoint something, because they say that it gets 200 times the amount of DNA off of something than a normal swab would.
That's amazing.
So basically, it's just a vacuum with a filter, and you test it, and there you go. And like I said earlier, he specifically went for the knots on the shoestrings. So I don't know if they're going to untie them and do it, or do it as a knot, or whatever. But I'm really looking forward to hear the next, weeks, months, or whatever it takes to hear what comes of this, because they did say actually that there was another hair that wasn't ever tested that they found way back when too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a terrible story, and I'm glad that the three of them are out. I do think the Alford plea as a whole is bullshit, because it's good and bad, because three people who I feel are free today, although convicted murderers, for them to have to admit guilt to get out because the state feels that their case isn't strong enough anymore to convict them again on another trial. It's such a double-edged sword that I don't know. I'm glad they're out. I'm glad that Jason he's like, no, I'm not doing it because I'm innocent. I'm not going to plead guilty to get out. But then he realized, his friend was on death row and eventually took it. And like I said, I'm glad they're out, but the Alford plea is iffy for me as a whole.
Yeah. It's a really complicated case. It's a really sore subject for a lot of people. And that's maybe one of the reasons why I, having lived in the area, haven't looked into more recent developments of the case, because I know the book that I read, this was at least 10 years ago, and the book was probably 10 years old even by the time I read it. I haven't read anything or watched anything recent, so I don't know a lot of the new developments up until the point at which they were released. That's probably the last I really even looked into it. But now that we've discussed it here, I'm a little more intrigued. And now that I'm 6 years away from living in that area, I feel like I've distanced myself enough that it doesn't feel as personal, because honestly, if you live in the area, if people even know that that's something that you're interested in, or something that you're looking into, or something that comes up just kind of fluidly in conversation, most of the time, if you spoke in defense of the people who had been convicted of these murders, even as preposterous as it was, people, as the gays say, read you the house down boots, darling. Like, they talked to you like you were trash. Because that mentality of these people are different and they're weird and they must have done it because this is what this small-minded community tells me, therefore it must be true, is alive and well even 5-6 years ago when I still lived in the area.
I
Yeah,
think
go
the
ahead.
story to me was that Metallica allowed their first song to be in that movie about them, the documentary.
Yeah, the Paradise Lost was the first documentaries that I watched. And the whole thing is it's hard to take documentaries very seriously because, like we said earlier with the Tiger King, they have their agenda,
Sure.
just like anything else. And John Mark Beyer is a fucking lunatic. He's so crazy. He's so out there. And then, you know, he's there at the murder site and he's preaching to God and this is my son, you killed my son, and quoting this and quoting that. But then in this Oxygen documentary, I'm going to get the name wrong, and I apologize if I do. I think it's Stevie's brother was in the documentary, and he was blacked out because he doesn't want an association with it outside of the documentary, but he wanted to be heard. He hated my brother. He didn't care about my brother. He's like, that was all just a show. And there was a long time where people thought that he was the one that did it. And that grandiose attitude and that flamboyant, over the top, you know, grandstanding was to try and cover up for it. And he's actually one of the ones that's come around to say, you know, well, originally he thought 100% that these kids were guilty and they killed my kid and they killed these boys. And he is a staunch supporter of Damien, Jason, and Jesse now. And they didn't do it. He's like, I now believe in my heart that they didn't do it.
Really?
And we just want answers. Yeah. He is 100% flipped.
Wow. I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where can we find that documentary again?
It's on Oxygen. And for those of us who don't have cable these days,
Yeah.
Oxygen does have an app. We use a Fire Stick. It's also available on Roku. Me personally, I bump the system in every single way. I've got somebody else's Netflix, somebody else's Hulu. And
allegedly. Because Netflix is listening to this right now.
Oh, absolutely they are. Yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize. The Oxygen app, if you have a cable provider, you're good. It's 100% free. But if you don't, if you sign up with it still, they give you 3 credits. So you can actually watch both episodes of the documentary with no issue because they lumped it together 1 and 2, 3 and 4. So if you go to the Oxygen app, it's called the Forgotten West Memphis 3. And it's worth a watch, 100%.
I will say that YouTube put out that exact same Oxygen it's like the highlights of that Oxygen series, basically. So if you go into YouTube and you type in
Okay.
the forgotten, West Memphis Three, it'll come up. It's about, I don't know, 20 minutes long-ish, maybe. And it's basically the highlights of all of that,
Okay.
which is what got me so into like wanting to actually watch it. So I'm glad you said that too. I watched all of that and I was like, this guy's awesome. And when you said he had a podcast, I'm like, well, now I'm going to listen to his podcast. Okay, cool.
Yeah, he's got some pretty good stuff. Like I said, I don't want to pimp other podcasts. And this, believe me, this podcast does not need any help because he's got plenty of followers. But
like
he's had, and his track record speaks for himself. I know here recently over the last 6 months or so, his podcast helped get somebody out of jail.
Yeah.
They were wrongly convicted, and the guy's name is Ed Ates.
Okay.
They got him out. I mean, it was 100% just come on. It's clear that it was a wrongful conviction, and that's all he works in is wrongful convictions.
Sure.
And he was there. He was there when he got out. The cameras were there, the podcast was there, and he's had interviews with him since. And I think it was season 2, I think, is where Ed was showcased. And it's taken a long time, but the cool thing about him is he does a season, but he doesn't stop working on it. He moves on to season 3. He was still working on season 2.
Yeah.
Season 4 comes out. He's still working on season 2. And, he's in it for the good. So
That's awesome.
Well, you can tell just from those little highlights that I watched from this Oxygen, little series that I want to know more about him and more about what he does, just based on how, like I said, he's unbiased. He is finding information from all different sources that he possibly can that he thinks are going to be credible. Not are they going to make good TV or make a good documentary? Right. Like, who's going to tell me the truth? Who is this person?
The funny thing about this is I don't know if you've listened to it or not, but on his podcast, since this documentary's come out, he's had some episodes come out, and the person that actually drove the whole thing was John Cryer, because his very first season was about cereal. He did that case a little bit. I never listened to it, but apparently John Cryer reached out to him and was like, we should take this to networks, and I guess it never worked out, and their contract expired. He's like, we're going to do something. So I guess him and John Cryer are like boys, and he's kind of the one that pushed him to do a documentary, and then when they eventually came into the West Memphis Three case, he's like, this is what we're doing, and here we are talking about it now.
I mean, they're doing a fucking awesome job. However, 20-something years later.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to see how this case ends. Like I said, I've been so invested in it for years that I'm ready for a conclusion.
Yeah, everybody deserves some answers at this point.
Absolutely.
Especially the family, but so many people are so invested. I had a friend who lived in Memphis as well. This was when I was there. She went to visit her boyfriend who was deployed in, I think, Japan. And she said in the airport in Japan, someone there, of course, this was many years ago, but someone there was wearing a Free the West Memphis Three t-shirt. So, I mean, globally, there are people who are involved in this case. You know what I mean? Invested in some sort of way, I guess is a better term.
Well, yeah, I was talking to Sierra about it today. She was like, I don't know anything about it. And I was watching that little Oxygen, like, the little clips and stuff. And she's like, what's this about? And I was like, I don't even know how to start this story. But also what I'm going to tell you is Johnny Depp was trying to get them out of jail. So like, that's how mostly publicized this place or this story was.
Yeah.
Eddie Vedder was also a big supporter too. And being a Central Illinois boy, I'll plug Mudvayne and Hell Yeah. I don't know if you know who those bands are.
I'm trying.
But Chad Gray is from the area. Well, they're all from the area, but Chad Gray has made much more of a career out of himself when he left Mudvayne and joined Vinnie Paul, God rest his soul, in Hell Yeah. But they actually have a song called West Memphis Free that they released after they got out. So I'm a heavy metal guy, so please check that song out because it's really cool.
I've noticed that about you.
It's funny that you say that because I didn't know that, but I was like reading up, little Wikipedia things today just to freshen up a little bit. And that's one thing I saw, the amount of songs written about them. And that is one that I noticed.
Good.
And also, if you want to give Sierra kind of like a crash course, it's a dramatization. So, of course, a few of the details are maybe not 100% factual and whatnot, but there's a dramatization that's available on Netflix. I can't think of the name of it right now, but I'm sure you could just Google West Memphis Three. Reese Witherspoon plays one of the mothers of the victims.
Yeah, I think she plays Pam Hobbs. Yeah.
Yeah. And my mother is obsessed with this film, and my mom is on my Netflix account, allegedly. So it's continually popping up and they're like, watch it again, like recently viewed, like sort of thing. And I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's available.
I know there was one called The Devil's Knot. That was one of the more popular ones.
I think that's the one, actually.
It's either that or West of Memphis.
I'm pretty sure it's The Devil's Knot. Yeah.
Devil's Knot. Yeah, I remember that movie. I saw it a long time ago. But yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll watch that one.
Yeah, you should check that out.
Yeah, I highly recommend anybody who's not familiar with the case to really, for lack of a better term for this episode, take a deep dive into it because it is so interesting. And I'm just ready for it to end after all these years because they deserve their vindication and they deserve their, to be able to say I'm innocent and, the law tell them that they're innocent.
Yeah. And not to have that little bit of speculation, but that will probably always exist in the hearts of some people.
Oh yeah.
Unfortunately.
No way.
Yeah.
Probably
so speaking of unsolved cases.
Oh, do tell.
Ooh. Come on, Ashley. Ask me.
What have you been diving into, Queen?
I'm not sure whether or not any of this has been reported on like a national platform. But here locally, we have had a development in a missing persons case, which is now a murder investigation. Paige Johnson. Have you heard about this, Ashley?
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. It's local.
I'm just making sure that you're paying attention and doing your homework.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris? Have you heard of Paige Johnson at all? Are you familiar with her case?
I heard about the Paige Johnson case on another podcast again because obviously I listen to plenty of true crime.
Was it The Vanished? Not to plug anybody else, but they did a great episode on her somewhat recently.
Yeah, it was sometime last year.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So I do remember the name and I did have to kind of brush up on it prior to this, but yeah, I definitely knew it. And I'll tell you what, it really shows that I don't know a goddamn thing about the geography of this nation based on where everything is and where you're at. And whew.
It's very common, actually. Most people don't consider the fact that, especially the northern part of Kentucky, is so close to Ohio. Mm-hmm. Literally, the northernmost part of Kentucky, which is where I live, and where Paige Johnson actually lived, is considered part of the Cincinnati, Ohio metropolitan area.
Okay.
It's all kind of like one big area, just separated by the Ohio River. Like I live in Kentucky, my address is Kentucky, but I can literally stand in front of my house and see Ohio. Like that's how close it all is. And a lot of people don't consider that. I've even heard some other podcasts when they were doing cases that were local to where we are talk about how, well, the victim was from so and such, but he worked in Cincinnati. They're like, wow, why would he commute that far? I'm like, well, it's not far. It's 10 minutes.
4 minutes, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just assumed Cincinnati was much farther north, but then,
and that's a natural assumption. And I was just saying all that. Just don't feel bad. Everybody does that. I also
don't travel well. I don't think I've been to a state that doesn't touch Illinois in my entire life.
Yeah.
But about that.
I have been diving into this case a little bit, and again, I can't quote you like verse in scripture, but I can give you a little bit of information if anybody's not familiar, and you guys jump in if you have any information. But Paige Johnson, she was 17 years old. She went missing September 23rd of 2010, actually. She had just turned 17, and she was actually out celebrating kind of like that 17th birthday. I guess she was supposed to meet up with her sister in Covington, which is literally like now that we're in quarantine and gyms are not a thing currently, I try to jog every day. I actually jog from where I live into Covington and back. So it's super close to where I am right now. She was supposed to hang out with her sister in Covington, ended up hanging out with a friend whose name was Jacob Bumpus. They went to a party, I guess it was a house party in Florence, Kentucky, which again, maybe 15, 20 minutes south of where we are right now, not super far. And then she disappeared. There were some witness accounts saying that Paige got really wasted, she got really drunk, she got really inebriated at this house party, and she was seen being carried out by Jacob, maybe potentially another young man involved. But Jacob's version of the events is that he dropped her off near her sister's house in Covington, again, northernmost part of Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati, at 15th and Scott Street, which is in Covington. Said he dropped her off there around 1 o'clock in the morning. However, when they did like a check of cell phone records, his phone at that time pinged still in Florence. And then some hours later, 4:15, 4:30, pinged in Ohio, kind of out in a more rural area near a state park, which was called East Fork Lake Park. 4:15, 4:30, didn't really have a great explanation as to why he was out there. And then when they kind of interrogated him a little bit more, just lawyered up, pled the fifth, cooperated no further with the investigation. And the poor girl was missing for 10 plus years until recently, as of March 25th. So not very long ago, just week-ish ago, her remains were found, coincidentally, about 1.5 miles from East Fork Lake, which is where his phone had pinged on the night that she went missing. So
how crazy is that?
Right? Such a coincidence, right?
Okay. So here's my thing.
Yeah.
This goes back to what I said earlier about an innocent person doesn't have a rock solid alibi, because he pinpointed the exact intersection that he dropped her off at.
Yeah.
And then his phone records placed him somewhere else. Okay. So this guy clearly needs to be talked to a little bit more.
Yeah.
And
you haven't watched enough forensic files yet.
And the other thing is none of her friends have talked to police, or they've lied, or they've had half stories and you know, with false claims of this and that. And the worst part about the whole thing is when he pinged near the East Fort State Park, they searched that park with cadaver dogs and found nothing. And then 10 years later, that's where she was found, was that same park.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, isn't that funny? I have nothing real to say, just that.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, or you at least verbalized the way that you verbalized it the way that you verbalized it, because my boyfriend and I were talking about it the other day, and of course, I think a lot of us naturally, hi baby, he's saying hello. I think we all naturally want to go, okay, it's finally 10 years later. This proves it. This proves that he was lying. This proves that he did it. He's gonna wind up in jail. We're gonna get his ass. And he and I were discussing that, and I said, yeah, but that's circumstantial evidence.
Right.
Circumstantial evidence, especially based on what you just said. They searched the area with cadaver dogs right after she went missing. Her remains were found there 10 years later. Who's to say someone didn't know, because it's been highly publicized by like the news medias here in the area, that that's where his cell phone had pinged, and someone moved her remains to that area to frame him. Like, it's just going to take a good defense attorney to get him off. Do I think he's responsible? Absolutely.
He knows something. He knows something.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, it was about a mile and a half from the tower that pinged off in 2007, where she was found.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm sorry, dude knows something.
Oh, I completely agree.
Whether or not he's got something to do with it, I don't know enough about the case to say yes or no.
Yeah.
Well,
but come on.
To me, all I'm thinking about right now is Wayne, your boy, what's his name? Israel Keys. How he froze a body for 2 weeks. I mean, how long could you freeze a body if you had the place to store it? I don't know, 10 years?
Maybe. I mean, and honestly,
he did it. I'm just saying whoever he could have hired, whoever he was in cahoots with, whoever, what I'm just saying. Like,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, it's possible that someone had that body there for 10 years and somehow decided.
Okay, so the 911 caller, according to, I think it was WCPO News 9, the 911 caller, the person who called to report that they had found remains, and of course those remains ended up being those of Paige Johnson, said, excuse me, I'm human, I burp, things like that happen. Forgive us, listeners.
We burp, we sneeze,
Yeah, we cough, we clear our throats. Said, my husband found a human skeleton or a human skull that's been burned out near East Fork Lake. Someone legitimately playing devil's advocate here, and it still could have been this Jacob Bumpus person, could have burned her remains and didn't have like a whole like decomposing body that they were dealing with for 10 years and then moved it out there later. You know what I mean? They could have just moved skeletal remains out there. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Someone could have disposed of her initially in a certain sort of way, had those remains in a location or on hand in some fashion, and then moved them out there to frame him. Now, do I think he's completely innocent? No. But do I think we have anything more than circumstantial evidence against this guy? No, I really don't.
See, I didn't hear that it was burned.
Burned remains.
Everything that I read was just a guy was out, he was hunting for deer sheds and found a human skull. I read maybe 4 or 5 articles, but none of them had mentioned that it was a burned skull. So that's news to me.
Yeah, burned remains is what I read, and it was kind of a local publication.
That's a local one, and I got it from. I read mine from WOWT, a different local one. I mean, I cut the news anchor's hair, so I have to pay attention to WOWT, right?
Not to brag or anything, but
he even had asked me like a while ago. He's like, "Do you follow the Paige Johnson case?" And I was like, "Well, no. I mean, I know vaguely what it's about, but I don't really know much about it now." And he goes, "Well, I think we have a lead. Like, I think we know something that's about to happen. Not that long ago." So of course, when I saw it come across their news article, their news feed, I was like, "Oh, let me read about this."
Yeah, it was big news in the area.
Well, definitely in the area because it's local.
Yeah. See, the only reason I knew about it was because of the Vanish podcast.
Yeah.
And reading up on it for this, the one thing that really stood out to me that's going to make this hard is they're looking for bone fragments and other potential evidence, but it's so thick, swampy, and muddy that's going to make it really hard. I mean, they're lucky enough to have found the skull and identify her through dental records, but to find anything else through something like that, Godspeed,
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, that's a pretty rural area. And you're welcome, Ashley. I always find a way to say the word rural when we're recording the podcast. But it's a pretty rural area. Say that 5 times fast. So, I mean, honestly, if someone were disposing of even, I mean, I hate to say this, but like pieces of her, there's a lot of like open farmland in Claremont County where they are potentially not even looking at this point.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah, so it's sad. And one of the points that I wanted to bring up before we are no longer talking about like Paige specifically was it's something that, I don't know, it's very near and dear to my heart with regard to telling stories of the non-ideal victims. And I find that we do that the majority of the time with talking about like crimes that were perpetrated against the LGBTQIA+ community. But that's one of the concerns that Paige's family had. And that's one of the reasons they felt like it took so long for maybe someone to to really like find something or take the case seriously, or for there to be actual developments in her case, is they said, you know what, Paige was literally like a poor white girl who came, you know, grew up on the wrong side of the river. And because she was considered someone who was like lower class, we don't feel like they took her disappearance seriously. And we feel like maybe further developments could have happened a lot quicker if she were a more ideal victim and they'd have taken this a little bit more seriously and put more time and resources and efforts into it. And yeah, not every victim is afforded the same amount of respect and consideration. And I think it's just so important to highlight the fact that that's a very real part of the world that we live in.
I hate it. God, do I hate it.
Yeah.
You know, it just, when you look at, you know, popular true crime cases in general, it's the young white girl, it's the middle-aged, you know, or the teenage white girl, the rich this, the rich that. And, you know, I'm getting kind of angry here, so I'm stuttering, and I apologize. But
Don't apologize.
if you have a 7-year-old white girl disappear and a 7-year-old black girl disappear, who the fuck do you think is going to get the news? You know?
Oh, absolutely.
And it pisses me off to no end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everybody needs to be treated equal. I don't give a damn if you're white, black, red, yellow, chartreuse, whatever. Like, you're missing. You deserve to be found. And it just, okay. All right. Go ahead. I'm gonna take a drink. I'm gonna take a drink now. I'm gonna take a drink.
You're absolutely correct. And that's part of the reason why Ashley and I choose to tell the stories that we choose, is because we do want to highlight the fact that not every victim and not every case is handled with the same respect and resources and consideration. And people need to know that. People need to be slapped across the face with reality, because most of the time people don't acknowledge it until they're forced to do so, in my opinion, at least.
And that's one of the things that I pointed out to you very early in our online relationship. I believe the words that I said was, your podcast was a fresh twist on the true crime genre.
It was such a compliment.
Because you're the only podcast I know that focuses on LGBTQIA anything. I've never found another one, and everybody deserves the same. Here you go. Learn about my case, find me, justify me, whatever. And no other podcast points out, you know, that, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but
discrepancy.
That discrepancy.
Yes, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's a perfect word for it. And that's why I love it so much, being, like I said earlier, an ally on all fronts, having somebody point out specific cases that it's awesome. And I love it. And I'm never going to stop listening as long as you are recording.
Well, and to be honest, for me, it's hard. You even heard probably in that last episode we put out how hard it is for me to, like, I'm a hairstylist. I have a creative outlet. That's what I do daily. But I don't have to necessarily put my personal creative self out there other than what I'm physically showing you, right? So You probably heard, like, it's hard for me to open up and be physically creative when I'm speaking to people. So when I thought, like, I'd love to talk about true crime, I'd love to talk about it in the LGBTQIA form. But in my own head, when I had thought of it before, I'm like, would I just be being, like, annoying? Would people not want to hear this? But then Wayne said it to me on his own accord. I was like, oh my God, someone else out there feels the same way I do. That must mean other people want to hear this too, right? Like, that must mean other people want to hear the same thing. Like, and then when we started researching more for it, I was like, how many cases could there be? But then I was like, holy shit, there is
it's limitless.
Yeah, and you've actually had some episodes where I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You know, okay, I'm a huge sports fan. And at the end of this episode, I've got some sports to talk about you, but we'll hold on for that. But when I'm a huge football fan, basketball, baseball, whatever. And when you guys did the Aaron Hernandez case, somehow I don't know if it went over my head or if I wasn't paying attention at the time. I had no idea there was a gay element to that.
Mhm.
And I think that was probably me just being stupid, and not paying attention. But
Most
that blew
people
my
don't.
mind. And that was a great episode too. And then the whole Netflix thing came out, and but you guys did it first. Because I listened to you guys before I watched it. You did it better. So
Thank you. I've honestly, to this day, not watched the Netflix docuseries because I feel like I know everything I need to know about that situation.
It was actually pretty good. It was all right. The one thing I did like about it was the hard ass dad,
Yeah.
growing up, whatever, and then by the end of it, be like, "Hey, my kid's my kid, man."
Mm-hmm.
He was like
Yeah.
your stereotypical fat Italian looking. Hey, my kid's not gays, But then at the end of it, it's like,
and the gay.
the acceptance of the whole, side story was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Look, I might have to check that out. I mean,
it was good.
It was probably my favorite part too.
it's quarantine time. I've got mostly I mostly have time, although I am still working a pretty good bit.
I'm considered essential, even though I work for a fucking chip company. So, yeah. Let's get into that a little bit. I tell you.
I am also on the essential list.
Yeah, but you help people. I'm like, you are on the front lines, as they like to say. They've lumped me into the front lines, and motherfucker, I sling chips. I drive a truck. I put chips on a shelf at your local Walmart. That's what I do. I am not essential. I'm sorry.
I mean, I disagree. Carbs are essential.
I don't know. I think part of it is that I'm anxious and paranoid as shit because I have asthma and I have the sarcoidosis, and the sarcoidosis that we talked about earlier, it originated in my lungs.
It's a huge
deal.
So
I have, double whammy on the lungs, and if I get it, I am fucked.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a soapbox that I will get on, and I'm gonna try not to stay on it for too long, but I'll get on the soapbox here.
Go for it.
It's come up a few times recently in the fact that there are a lot of healthcare workers right now who are complaining about their situation, being on the front lines of this. And it's an unpopular opinion, but I think it's kind of bullshit that we as healthcare workers are complaining about being on the front lines of this, because this is what you signed up for. Mm-hmm. When you said that because when you sought this out as a career, when you said that this is what I'm going to do with my life, when you took most like when you graduate or when you're licensing or whatever, there's like a Hippocratic oath that you take, and you say that you are going to provide for people that thing that you've studied to do, that craft, that knowledge, that skill set. You're going to provide it for people no matter what. And this is not the first time in history people who work in healthcare have been asked to do this sort of thing. So stop your fucking belly aching and complaining is my opinion.
Agreed.
I'm standing.
But
agreed, absolutely.
I love that you have this perspective, because I have also said to people, who didn't fucking sign up for this, but who is still on the front lines? The people who work in grocery stores, the people who are delivering food, the people who are working in restaurants. They didn't sign up for this bullshit. They didn't sign up to put themselves potentially in harm's way. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who should be complaining. We are the ones who should sit the fuck down and say, this is the ride that I signed up for, so let's just let it go. I'm so fucking sick of hearing people complain. Now, the one legitimate complaint that people have is the shortage of PPE. That sucks.
That's
placing us in these
thing,
situations in which we're going to potentially be exposed. We should be able to adequately and appropriately protect ourselves.
You're allowed to be pissed.
Exactly. I will give you that. But otherwise, sit down, shut the fuck up, do your job, and do it the best you possibly can. And wash your goddamn hands.
And wash your goddamn hands.
Absolutely.
My favorite quote was from a client who's a nurse before all this ended, and it was starting to come to a head. And I did her hair like probably one of the last days I was in the salon, and she had to do a peer interview with a potentially new nurse. And I won't say where she works, but it's a big hospital. And her peer interviewee asked, "So what happens if someone shows up here with the coronavirus?" She's like, "What do you mean?" "We treat them like we that's what you do. You're a nurse." And she's like, "Well, I have kids at home." Okay. So her response was, "Okay, so it's obvious that you don't want to work. So why are you here?" Like, basically that's what she said to her. And I asked her, I was like, "Well, what did you say to the doctor after that?" And she goes, "I walked out and I said, I don't know if she's stupid or if I hate her, but I don't think she should work here."
Or both.
Yeah, I've been associated with the grocery business for 25 years. I started at the age of 15 working in a grocery store.
And I couldn't do this without you, so thank you.
And it was never supposed to be my life path. It never, I worked there in high school. It was one of those jobs where you showed up for the interview and the guy wasn't there and already had me on the schedule. Okay. And when I was 7 years ago in March 3rd, I believe, I started working at Frito-Lay. And overall, it's a great company and they take care of us.
One of my clients is one of your higher ups, by the way. I hate to say that, but I love him and he's a great guy.
What's that? I missed that.
One of my clients is like a higher up for Frito-Lay at this point. He used to work for Pepsi and now he works for Frito-Lay. Okay.
Beautiful.
Anyway, sorry. I don't want to, like, I had a moment right there.
We'll talk later.
Okay.
But, and I'll tell you what, I'm a route sales representative, which means I drive the truck, I take it into the store, and I stock it with my merchandiser.
Sure.
And I will say, my commission check this month was pretty fucking awesome. But at the same time, don't be a goddamn asshole. Sure. There's people coming into these stores. I literally had a woman, and like a couple weeks ago was when like the shitstorm hit. Just 2 days ago, I had a woman at one of my stores kick a stack of boxes over that I was working off of, told me to get the fuck out of the way because she needed her Harvest Cheddar Sun Chips. Like, oh my God. don't be that person. Like, we didn't sign up for this shit. Like,
I mean, I felt that way before, but I would never actually do that.
I mean, I have the busiest Walmart in the area, and I am so thankful that they've changed their hours during this whole pandemic to where I'm in that store and out of that store either before or right when the doors open. Because when those doors open, the flood of people that come in there is insane. It's not that bad. If you can't survive off what you have in your house for a week, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 12 days, you need to reevaluate your shopping is what you need to do.
Or your eating
You
habits.
also don't need to be an
Honestly,
asshole.
Yeah.
You also don't need to be an asshole to the 18-year-old kid who's working in dairy trying to put cheese on a shelf and you're fucking hockey hip checking him out of the way to get your shredded Colby Jack. And you don't need to be kicking boxes over when I'm stocking Sun Chips because, like, we're all in this together.
Right.
And
you're absolutely right.
And 80% of the people that I encounter the last 3 weeks are insufferable. And I don't understand it. And I honestly believe that working with the public for so long is what's ruined me as a person.
Well,
and this is not helping. Not helping.
I've even told Sierra that I'm considering going back to not running my own business as a hairstylist anymore once this is all over. Because guess what happens when you run your own business? You have to talk to all your clients.
Yeah.
And guess what all your clients want? They don't want to provide for you. They want a haircut right now.
Right.
It's really made me learn, I don't want to fucking do this. Like if something like this were to happen again, and it will, probably not tomorrow once this is all over, but it'll happen down the road. I'm prepared for it now because I don't want to fucking deal with that again. I don't. What you're going through, what I'm going through, what Wayne's going through, I don't want to have to, I don't want to have to. I don't want to be the one who's like, I'm sorry, I can't leave my house. I can't cut your hair and I can't invite you into my home to cut your hair because we're not supposed to fucking go anywhere. Like, how hard is it for me to explain that my job is shut down and if I'm caught doing hair outside of my salon when it's illegal, that I'm going to lose my license forever and I cannot do my job anymore.
I don't understand how people don't grasp that. Like, we have a very close friend of ours who owns a salon here in town. It's where my wife and my youngest daughter goes. And she's just done. You know, she's not fucking around. And from what I can tell, her clients are cool.
I have quite a few that are, but not a lot. The ones you expect to be.
Yeah, and even now we have our mini Aussie, who I've posted several times on my social media. And here's my story pod on Twitter and Instagram. That girl needs cut. She needs her nails done. She needs her hair done because it's some crazy stuff.
Girl,
but I'm not mad at my groomer for not being open right now. We're talking about ordering stuff on Amazon to try and cut her nails and cut her hair, you know, ourselves until this all blows over, because that's how normal people think.
You're absolutely right.
I was sending like instructional like videos and pictures to my friend the other day on how to cut her son's hair at home. He ended up looking straight up like Dumb and Dumber, but at least his hair is short enough to be out of his eyes. And
okay, that's the second time that one for each of you that I've had beer come out of my nose. Please stop. It burns.
Well, then we've done our jobs.
That's what we're here for.
Oh.
Okay. I have to ask, have you seen the video of the guy who self-cuts his own bowl cut? Have you seen this guy? Have you seen this video, Ashley?
I feel like maybe, but I feel like now I need to see it. You need to
it's awful. You gotta get on your phone, YouTube, self bowl cut, and I'm sure he's the first guy that comes up. I mean, he's got a rusty old pair of scissors. He's got the
actual bowl, and then you just trim around.
No, he doesn't even use a bowl, but he just uses the scissors, and he's just like, hey man, this is what we're gonna do. We're just gonna go for it, bro. And he's just a total Bill and Ted kind of.
I love it.
And as a hairstylist, I recommend that you watch it. And if you can't find it, let me know, because I will send it to you post haste. Post haste.
As much as I bitch about my job, I sit and I think about people like Wayne who have to, or get to go to work, I guess we're supposed to say. You get to go to work and you get to go to work, and you're dealing with so much bullshit all the time. Wayne's putting himself out there and being terrified, I'm sure. But he knows this is what I signed up for. You're someone, obviously. I'm someone who didn't sign up for this shit.
Didn't sign up for it, yeah. You were the people that I feel for.
Well, I praise Chris a lot because you're still doing it and you're still putting yourself out there knowing that you have your own autoimmune issue. I'm lucky enough that I have a part-time job that we talk about as a barista at Starbucks. They're paying me my, hourly wage of my minimum, my part-time job. So it's something. It's nice to have, but every other hairstylist out there, everyone else out there who doesn't have it, who runs their own business, who has their own job where they have no income. That's what's fucking scary to me during this point. And I praise everyone who gets to go to work, but also wants to bitch about it.
Yeah, we're very lucky in that I'm considered essential and I get to go to work 5 days a week.
But it sucks.
Yeah, and my wife is able to work remotely. She works for Caterpillar in the legal division, and
that's awesome.
God love her. you know, she's the breadwinner of the family. So if she wasn't able to do what she does remotely, we would be screwed.
I feel that.
So yeah. And you know, I have an older daughter who's 15 who lives with her mother because I am divorced and remarried. And I haven't seen her in almost 2 months now.
Is
And
that because you're working?
and that fucking blows.
Is that because you're working?
No, it's because of the quarantine and we don't want to.
Just
Yeah.
wondering if she not want you to come over because you're working, going to and from, or she's just staying with her mom just for.
Well, she lives with her mom just as it is now. And when it first started, we're like, "Ooh, your mom's sick. You can't come over here right now."
Understood.
But then now it's just like we're just following the rules.
Yeah.
And it blows. And I know she's going to listen to this. So Morgan, I love you and I miss you.
Aww.
God damn it. Let's get through this and let's binge some Netflix together.
Hi, Morgan from the Slay Queens podcast.
Yeah. And without saying too much, she'll really appreciate that from the two of you.
She must like true.
That's it. Yeah.
True crime girl. Yes, I like that.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But yeah, if my wife wasn't able to work remotely, I mean, God only knows. I mean, we're actually two of the luckiest people that I can think of in our circle of friends right now.
Sure.
When it comes to being able to be home and still work, and then me being able to go to work, and you know, we make jokes a lot. Like as soon as I get home from work, my 6-year-old who I do the Naughty Words podcast with, first thing she says to me most days is, "Go wash your Rona off of you." So I walk in and I have to take a shower right away just in case. And you know, and this is some crazy times, and I don't.
It is.
I don't know. I'm hoping that the powers that be, who shall remain nameless, will get his head out of his ass and kind of put some things in order to where we can actually, you know, stop the idiots from going to church secretly.
Right?
And go. Like our town just now shut down the riverfront because we live on the Illinois River.
We have a major church in Ohio that is still holding services.
Yeah, I mean, there was somebody who just got arrested for it. It's like, okay, most of the places I've seen around here are doing the virtual thing,
which I've done.
All good. Like I am not a religious person. I'm not go to church. I don't do this. I don't do that. I'm not naive enough to think there might be whatever. Okay, not talking about religion, but online stuff. Do it. Love it. Go for it. But if you're sneaking around and congregating behind people's backs, like you're part of the problem. This is why we have so many cases. This is why so many are dying. Like, just fucking listen. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do is listen.
Well, to your point, working in a Walmart, I went with Sierra one day who, you know, we go to the grocery store once a week, if not less than that, because we have HelloFresh delivered. I decided to do that before we even moved, so it's kind of helped us during this quarantine thing, right?
How do you not have a sponsorship yet? Come on.
Sorry. I've been ordering from a place that delivers food. But I've been ordering from them. It happened before this happened. You know, when we decided to move, I thought it would be easier. So at least we have that, but like we do go to the grocery store for other things, you know, home things and snacks and what have you. But it didn't happen until a couple of days ago. We went to Kroger, and I mean, she came out almost having like a straight up anxiety attack because there were too many people around her. Like she just felt like they weren't regulating how people were acting. And she's like, there's no social distancing going on. There's no one, you know, regulating who's coming in and out, and people are on top of me, and they're like getting angry with each other, and they're fighting over things that it's ridiculous. It was basically like going into a mosh pit and trying to get what you need and then coming out is kind of what I got from her physically speaking.
Yeah,
You know what I
see
mean?
that. I see that a lot. And one thing that I will tell that anybody who's listening, if you're the kind of person who goes into Kroger or Walmart or whatever local grocery store that you have, and
Say
you,
whatever it is.
yeah, and if you go down an aisle and you see somebody you know and you social distance across the aisle with your shopping carts so nobody else can get through, fuck you. Because people got to work.
I love everything about that.
I can't see my first. Okay, my first stop, all good. I'm out of there before customers get in. My second store, got to deal with a little bit of shit. My third store, I'm there, full on open store. It's a small store, like their back room's the size of my bathroom, if that gives you any kind of visual. So, you know, the aisles are smaller, everything. And people just don't get it. They're wearing gloves, they're wearing masks, but they're standing right next to each other, talking to each other, touching each other, not letting the grocery people get in the way. You know, they're in the way of people doing their job. They're bitching because toilet paper's not on the shelf, but yet they're standing in front of the toilet paper shelf where they need to stock the shit, and they're in the way. Like, they just don't get, they're so tone deaf. And I've never been so frustrated in my entire life with people. Like, I'm rubbing my temples and rubbing my forehead as we speak. Like, I don't, just stay home.
Stay home.
I mean, I do understand that, like the Kroger, I don't know how things work in your area, and I'm assuming it's pretty much the same, but Kroger and Walmart here, they have the online shopping, but we tried to do an online Kroger order yesterday, and it's like 8 days out.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I understand that. I go to the store still because I'm still out there 5 days a week doing my job. So if I'm going to get it, I'm going to fucking get it. So I do all the shopping, you know, if we need stuff. And
our problem is we don't plan 8 days out. We plan like 2 days.
Exactly.
That's the issue. That's why we're like, okay, we'll make one grocery trip a week, if not every 2 weeks, hopefully.
We usually make one about every week, and I've been trying to extend it out, but I don't know.
Too.
Yeah, it's unprecedented times for sure as far as this goes. So
that's why we're doing this way. This is how we get to have hangouts like this.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is awesome.
It's a sign of the times. Thank you, Harry
You
Styles.
literally stole my like podcasting cherry when it comes to like virtual guest hosting, this, that, and everything. So
this is the first time we've done this. Yeah. And I'm so glad that we did. I had the best time, actually.
I did too.
It was good. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was real fun. I want to do it again for sure.
Hopefully we can do it again. And Ashley and I will have to do this again because we can't see each other for an undetermined amount of time.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to praise you.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't deserve that.
You do a little bit. You do only in the respect that I have clients that are still to this day asking me, well, we've pushed out till May something. What are we going to do about my hair? Can I come over? Can you come over? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But when it came to recording a podcast and I told you how much I trust you and you know, I don't mind having you in my house. You told me you may have been compromised with, I'm not going to give in too much information. You're not sick. I'm just saying being around someone may have been. And that was weeks ago where you're like, we're just going to sit around and wait. Like, I want to make sure everyone's good. And I'm like, I literally almost cried because I told Sierra, I'm like, this is one person who actually respects me enough to say that to me. Yeah. And you're the only person I allow in my home. Other than her.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just amazing to hear that, like, because of how my clients have been reacting and how I've been treated through all this. So I appreciate you, and everyone else should know how awesome that is about you. You're being responsible, like we all should be.
Well, I'm a complete asshole, but I'm not so much an asshole that I would make you sick in any sort of way or put you at risk. So I would not.
You're not a complete asshole.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
We all got a little bit in us. It's all right.
Well, I mean, you have to get by
have
day to day, right?
Especially when we work with people.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But
Which is pretty much all of us.
It is.
every industry is a customer service industry, I say. We're
That's
all catering to someone.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. All right, guys, gals, and everyone in between. We have taken this shallow dive and made it not so shallow, but I have enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't change anything about it.
Yeah, we went a little long, but that's fine. I'm all right.
Yeah, I wouldn't change a thing. So I would like to thank, first and foremost, because I'm a Southern gentleman, I'd like to thank you, Ashley, for joining me for this not so shallow dive. And keeping me entertained and smiling per usual. And so very much want to thank Chris for joining us on the Shallow Dive, Not So Shallow episode. And
Once
again, yes, it's been so amazing. And anybody who wants to check him out, Chris, tell them how they can find you again.
At Here's My Story Pod on Twitter, Here's My Story Pod on Instagram, and Here's My Story Pod at gmail.com. And then there's a Facebook group, Here's My Story Pod. Again, it's a private group that you can post without your friends seeing your posts. And there's almost 300 people in the group who are always willing to talk to you and give you encouragement and advice, whatever you need. So please join, all the good stuff.
Yeah. And tune in because he's going to be telling my story soon. So
it's going to be sooner than later because I'm going to edit it after this and you're going out. So
yeah. And if you guys want to know what's wrong with me and what else going on up here, listen to my story.
And I want to apologize for the one word that you made me say. I
did do it. I did do that.
Yeah,
but
although you did edit it when you typed it, but I can't edit it when I say it.
Is it a 6-letter F word?
It is. But sometimes you got to put the truth out there, even if the truth hurts. But I will not edit myself for anyone. Other than my granny, because I mean she's 96 and I don't think she could handle all of it. All right, guys. I think this brings us to the time, right?
That's it. Mic drop.
All right, mic drop time. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode here with the Slay Queens and our friend Chris from the Here's My Story podcast. If you want to find the Queens, we are available where, Ashley, for their viewing pleasure?
Your listening pleasure would be Spotify or iTunes, Apple Podcast.
All the big ones.
We have all of them, all the big platforms. And then if you want to view us and listen, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and slayqueenspod@gmail.com.
And also Patreon. I think we are going to take the audio from this wonderful session and we'll put it out to the platforms. But I also want to take the video, if everyone's on board with that, and put it out to Patreon for everyone to see. It won't even be like one of the paid tiers. We'll just put it out to the public so you guys can enjoy the funny faces that I make, and you can enjoy Sing Salem there.
I don't know if I'm comfortable with everybody seeing how much I've drank and how many times I left the screen to go tinkle, but go for it.
Ashley and I have the smallest bladders on the planet, so no worries, no concerns there. But thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Chris. And go out and slay, Queens, right? Just
not each. Was that
just
Hunter?
not each other. All right. Thank you, guys, so much.
Thank you.
Bye.